The morning of my wedding should have been the happiest day of my life. Sunlight streamed through the sheer curtains, glinting off the delicate crystal chandelier in our bedroom. My dress hung like a promise on the wardrobe door, embroidered with tiny pearls that shimmered like captured starlight. I could hear the faint murmur of the city waking outside, unaware that inside this apartment, I was about to experience the most crushing heartbreak of my life. My parents had been quiet all week, their smiles tight and distant, their eyes too carefully neutral. I had dismissed it at first, thinking it was the stress of planning that always hovered over them during important events. I was wrong, terribly wrong. When I called them to let them know I was ready to leave for the church, the voice on the other end was cold, measured, and impossibly cruel. "We won't be attending," my mother said, the words clipped and precise, as if reading from a prepared script. "Excuse me," I asked, certain I had misheard. "My husband and I have decided it's necessary for you to learn humility," my father added, his tone like ice sliding across the phone line. "We think this lesson will do you good." I felt the blood drain from my face. Humility lesson. I had spent years honoring my family, respecting their wishes, listening to their advice, even when it conflicted with my own desires. And yet here they were, boycotting my wedding, a day I had dreamt of since childhood because they deemed me too proud. "No," I whispered, though the word sounded fragile against the weight of their judgment. "You can't be serious." "We are." My mother replied calmly, almost proudly. "Consider it necessary for your growth. You'll understand one day." They hung up. The line clicked dead before I could breathe, before I could protest, before I could beg them to reconsider. I sat there, frozen, staring at the wedding invitation in my hands, the golden calligraphy suddenly mocking me. My heart thudded painfully against my chest, a mix of disbelief and hurt. How could the people who brought me into this world, the ones who raised me and promised to protect me, do this to me on the most sacred day of my life? Tears blurred my vision as I tried to steady my trembling hands. I thought of my fiancé waiting nervously at the church, the guests arriving in joyful anticipation, unaware that the family of honor had abandoned me. The thought of walking down the aisle alone, under the gaze of friends and strangers alike, was almost unbearable. But more than humiliation, more than sorrow, a quiet flame of anger ignited within me. How dare they? How dare they try to teach me a lesson by hurting me? Did they think I was a child to be disciplined? Did they think I would crumble? I changed into my dress with mechanical precision. Every bead and lace detail, a small rebellion against despair. My makeup became armor, my veil a shield. When I arrived at the church, the music swelled around me, the scent of roses filling the grand hall, but the emptiness of my parents' absence was a cold, gnawing shadow. Guests whispered, some in pity, some in disbelief. The priest tried to offer comforting words, but I could barely hear them over the roar in my head. The sound of betrayal, sharp and piercing. My fiancé held my hand tightly, his eyes full of worry and love, silently reminding me that I wasn't truly alone. As I stood at the altar alone, facing a crowd that had gathered to witness joy but instead saw heartbreak, I realized something profound. Humility wasn't what my parents wanted to teach me. Power, control, and shame were, and if they thought they could break me with this cruel stunt, they were gravely mistaken. Something in me shifted that day, a resolve forming beneath the layers of grief. I would not cry myself into submission. I would not let their selfishness define me. One day, they would see the consequences of their actions not as a lecture, not as an apology, but as the truth laid bare, undeniable and inescapable. And as the church doors closed behind the last of the later, arriving guests, I took a deep breath and silently vowed. They had taught me humility, but I would teach them pride. The days after my wedding, or what should have been my wedding, were colder than any winter I had ever known. My parents didn't call, didn't send flowers, didn't even attempt a perfunctory message of congratulations. The silence was deafening, a hollow echo of everything I had ever believed about family. I felt abandoned, yet the anger that had first flared in the church now settled into a slow, simmering burn, sharp and constant. Every morning, I woke to the same questions. Why, how could they do this? Were all the years of obedience and care meaningless? Friends tried to console me, saying things like, "Some parents just can't handle independence," or "they'll come around." But their words were weak shields against the reality I faced. My parents weren't ignorant or naive. They had made a choice, and it was one that cut me to the bone. My fiancé, my husband now, in spirit if not yet in ceremony, was my anchor. He never let me drown in grief. He would hold my hand through sleepless nights, whispering that we would find a way to move forward, that this betrayal didn't define us. His quiet confidence was a balm to my shattered heart, though it couldn't erase the sting of my parents' absence. It was during one of these quiet evenings, sitting together on our small balcony overlooking the city, that he first spoke the words that would change everything. "Have you noticed how their reasons never quite add up?" he asked, his eyes tracing the horizon, but his mind clearly elsewhere. I frowned. "I don't understand what you mean. They claim it's about humility," he said, turning to face me. "But think about it. You've always been respectful, kind, intelligent. There's nothing arrogant in who you are, and yet they didn't just skip the wedding. They orchestrated a public humiliation. That's not teaching humility. That's control." A chill ran down my spine. The thought had crossed my mind, of course, but hearing it aloud made it undeniable. My parents' lesson was a mask, a carefully crafted lie. Over the next week, he began quietly observing and collecting pieces of the puzzle. Old bank statements, casual comments from relatives, whispers in social circles, they all hinted at something far more sinister than a simple lesson in humility. My parents were hiding something, and it wasn't about me. Meanwhile, I faced the lingering reminders of my broken wedding everywhere. Photos from the ceremony, now a collection of smiles without the people I loved most, social media posts with gentle congratulations from friends, and the small, thoughtless comments from extended family who didn't understand the depth of the betrayal. Each reminder was a fresh sting, and each day my resolve hardened. Yet the most painful moments were private, those when I allowed myself to imagine my parents sitting at home, untouched by guilt, watching the celebration they had abandoned with calculated satisfaction. I wanted to scream at them, to shake them into recognition of their cruelty, but I held back. Rage would not be my undoing, it would be my fuel. My husband sensed this. "We'll get to the truth," he promised one night, brushing my hair from my face. "And when we do, the world will see what they've done, not as a lesson for you, but as the exposure of their own secrets." The idea settled in my mind like a seed planted in fertile soil. For the first time since the wedding, I felt a flicker of hope. The betrayal, once raw and consuming, could become a tool. Their control, their arrogance could be turned against them. And so I began to watch, to listen, to remember every small detail they had ever tried to conceal. Every casual lie, every half-truth, every sharp word that hinted at envy or fear, all of it mattered. My pain was no longer just sorrow, it was information, a map leading to the secret they thought they had buried forever. By the end of that week, I was no longer just the heartbroken bride who had been left alone at the altar. I was a strategist, quietly calculating my next moves, each one guided by the steady hand of someone who had learned the harshest lesson of all. Betrayal hurts, but truth hurts more, and one day, scales would tip. I went to sleep that night with a sense of calm determination. Humility was not the lesson they had given me. No, what they had given me was far more powerful, the understanding that justice, when executed with patience and precision, could be sweeter than revenge imagined in the heat of anger. The weeks that followed felt like walking through a fog, each day heavy with unspoken questions and the quiet ache of betrayal. But beneath the sadness, a sharper sensation had begun to grow. A need for understanding, for uncovering the truth behind my parents' cruelty. I was no longer just the abandoned bride. I was an investigator, and my husband was my silent partner, skilled at uncovering what others wanted to hide. It started with small inconsistencies, casual remarks from distant relatives, mentions of money being moved in odd ways, stories that didn't quite match the versions my parents had told. At first, they seemed trivial, almost meaningless, but my husband noticed them instantly. "They're hiding something," he said one evening, flipping through some old family documents he had managed to obtain. His brow was furrowed, his expression sharp with the thrill of discovery. "It isn't about you. This is about control, about appearances, and maybe even greed." My stomach twisted. Greed, control. How far had they gone to orchestrate the humiliation of the one person they should have cherished most? We began piecing it together like a puzzle. Old tax statements revealed hidden expenditures, money siphoned away in secrecy. Conversations overheard at family gatherings suggested resentments that had festered for years. Jealousy over achievements I had never realized had provoked envy. Even the humility lesson itself now appeared as nothing more than a cruel distraction from their personal failings they could no longer hide. One evening, while sifting through letters tucked away in the back of a drawer, I discovered a stack of correspondences between my parents and a family lawyer. The letters detailed disputes over inheritance, a secret property deal, and even manipulations designed to keep me dependent on their favor. Their boycott of my wedding was not a lesson in humility. It was a power play, a calculated attempt to assert dominance and shame me into submission. I felt my hands shake as I read. The betrayal was deeper than I had imagined, but alongside the shock came clarity. Everything suddenly made sense. The quiet coldness, the fake smiles, the precise words meant to wound. Their actions were never about me. They were about preserving their illusion of control and authority. That night I cried, not out of despair, but out of a strange, liberating rage. My parents had tried to cage me with humiliation, but in doing so, they had revealed themselves entirely. Every lie, every manipulation, every hidden agenda now lay bare before me. My husband, sensing my determination, placed a hand on mine. "Now we have what we need," he whispered, "and we'll make sure the world sees it, not with vengeance that burns you, but with truth that cannot be denied." We began planning carefully. There would be no rash actions, no public confrontations that could backfire. Instead, we would gather evidence, document inconsistencies, and create a narrative that could not be disputed. Every document, every witness, every carefully preserved detail became a weapon not of cruelty, but of justice. And yet, despite the meticulous planning, I couldn't ignore the emotional toll. The parents I had idolized, who had raised me and shaped my world, were not the people I thought they were. That realization cut deeper than their absence at the wedding ever could. I mourned the parents I had believed in, even as I steeled myself to confront the parents who existed. By the end of the month, our plan had begun to take shape. A delayed wedding reception was quietly arranged, invitations sent under the guise of a simple celebration. But beneath the surface, it was a stage for truth, a place where every secret my parents had tried to bury would be revealed. And as I stood in our apartment, reviewing documents and photographs, I felt a strange sense of anticipation. For the first time since the wedding, I was not a victim. I was in control. I had been betrayed, yes, but betrayal had a way of teaching lessons far stronger than humility. It taught discernment, strategy, and resilience, and in the quiet of that night, I smiled for the first time in weeks. The storm was coming, and this time, it would wash away more than just hurt feelings. It would expose lies, unravel illusions, and reveal the true nature of those who had dared to betray me. The night of the delayed reception arrived, glittering and serene, yet electric, with attention only a carefully orchestrated revelation could bring. The hall was bathed in soft golden light, tables adorned with flowers, candles flickering in quiet rhythms. Friends and family gathered, unaware that what seemed like a simple celebration was a stage for justice long in the making. I stood at the entrance, my dress flowing like liquid silk, my hand steady, my heart calm. My husband, ever the quiet strategist, gave my hand a reassuring squeeze. "Tonight, everything changes," he murmured. I nodded, feeling the weight of weeks of planning, discovery, and restrained fury. Tonight, truth would speak louder than lies. The evening began innocently, laughter mingling with music, guests exchanging polite congratulations. My parents arrived late, as expected, their expressions carefully measured, masks of civility in place. They smiled at familiar faces, shook hands, and even offered hollow apologies to distant relatives. But I saw through it all. Their pride was intact, yet fragile, teetering on the edge of exposure. When the time came, my husband stepped forward, clearing his throat. The room quieted, curious eyes turning toward us. He held a small binder, thick with documents, photographs, and letters, every piece of evidence we had collected. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice calm but commanding. "Tonight isn't just a celebration, it's a revelation. There have been misunderstandings about why certain people were absent at the original wedding. We're here to set the record straight." My parents stiffened, their eyes narrowing. A flicker of unease crossed their faces. They knew what was coming, even if they didn't yet know how deeply the truth would cut. He started with the subtle inconsistencies, the small lies my parents had used to justify their absence. Then he moved to the letters, the financial manipulations, the deliberate power plays designed to control and shame me. Each revelation landed like a stone in a still pond, rippling outward, shaking the calm surface of their carefully curated reputations. Guests whispered, some mouths dropping open in disbelief, others nodding in understanding as the truth unfolded. Friends who had doubted my pain now saw it laid bare in undeniable evidence. Relatives who had been complicit in silence shifted uncomfortably, confronted with the reality of manipulation and deceit. Finally, he looked at me and smiled, a quiet, triumphant acknowledgement of the journey we had taken together. I stepped forward, my voice steady and strong, carrying across the hall. "You tried to humiliate me, to teach me a lesson with your absence," I said, my eyes locked on my parents. "But what you revealed instead was your fear, your envy, and your greed. You wanted control, and instead, you've shown everyone who you truly are." My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. My father's hands trembled slightly, the cracks in their composure now visible for all to see. The weight of their deception, hidden for years, was now public. Their lesson in humility had backfired spectacularly. And yet, as I stood there, I felt no cruelty in my heart. This was not vengeance, this was justice. This was the culmination of pain transformed into power, betrayal converted into clarity. They were exposed, yes, but I was liberated. I could finally breathe, unshackled from their manipulations, free to live a life defined by love and honesty rather than fear. The night continued, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations were quieter, glances sharper, but my husband and I moved through the room with an unspoken certainty. We had endured heartbreak, betrayal, and humiliation, and emerged stronger. Together, we had turned despair into triumph. As the evening drew to a close, I looked around the hall, taking in the faces of those who had witnessed the truth. There was no joy in Schadenfreude, only a profound sense of resolution. My parents, stripped of their masks, could no longer dictate the narrative of my life. Hand in hand, my husband and I left the stage, hearts light, spirits high. The storm of betrayal had passed, leaving behind clarity, justice, and a newfound strength that neither humiliation nor deception could ever touch again. And for the first time in weeks, I smiled fully, not as a victim, not as a betrayed child, but as a woman who had faced betrayal and emerged not broken, but beautifully, irrevocably whole.